This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and this episode is brought to you by Silna Health. That's S-I-L-N-A, the premium front-end RCM company that leverages technology with a team of onshore insurance experts to handle benefit checks, eligibility checks, and prior authorizations. Finally, a vendor that you can trust, like a full-time employee that scales with your business. Just mention the Profiles in Leadership podcast to receive a free trial. Today, our guest is Kendell Jno-Finn, who was born in Dominica, West Indies, and came to Birmingham, Alabama from St. Croix in 1999 to attend Samford University. While at Samford, Kendell was a member of the track and field team and earned a bachelor's in education with a concentration in exercise science. He then attended the University of Alabama in Birmingham and received his doctorate in physical therapy in 2007. Kendell founded M3 Endeavors, a performance venture, in 2015, and in 2018 expanded the company to include physical therapy and Pilates. M3 Performance and Physical Therapy now operates across a few platforms in the Birmingham area. He has a passion for evaluating movement in those who desire to live active lives and developing programs to improve their skill and performance. When not in the clinic, you can find him spending time with family, on the golf course, or developing new recipes in the kitchen. So, Kendell, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me, Steve.
So what's your go-to recipe? You know, if you got family and friends and they say Kendell is a really good chef and he can cook something amazing, what are you going to cook them?
Man, I usually I don't really cook with like following a recipe, but I like to ad lib. So I love making soups because soups, gumbo, things like that. They things that allow me to build flavor. So that I would say that probably is my go-to. Um, that and probably short ribs. My wife loves short ribs, so it's one of those things that over time I've continued to kind of perfect.
Okay, good for you. That sounds amazing. Like to sample that sometime.
All right.
So give us a little context. As the bio said, you grew up in Dominica. So kind of tell us about your childhood and living there, and then how you got to the U.S. and the state of Alabama.
Yeah, so Dominica, for people who may not, the geography is we're just southwest of Barbados, so between Martinique and Guadeloupe down in the Caribbean. And grew up in really a small village. It was my mom, my sister, and myself. And um, you know, my mom was one of three children on her mother's side, and just had she was just I think she was just different. All right. Didn't graduate from high school, just because of kind of where socioeconomics were and the things that kind of were happening. So she finished high school in the village, not necessarily a high school where you get a high school diploma, but started working for a dry goods shop. She became the buyer there, and she just kind of continued doing those things. There's a lady I watched bake cakes on an open fire,
Yeah.
and she just made the decision that this next generation, like my generation, would be maybe a step ahead of where she was. And so she made the commitment. We had visited St. Croix a couple of times, and she made the commitment to move us to St. Croix. And so we moved to St. Croix in 1988. And so St. Croix is part of U.S. territory, and so
And
U.S.
how old were you then when this?
I was eight going on nine.
And before that, I mean, you lived in a village, as you said, and it had no electricity, no running water. Is that correct?
Yeah. So until I moved to the Virgin Islands, I didn't live in a house that had running water or electricity. We cooked outside. Bois de feu, right? This is basically a piece well, basically, if you think about a log, right? That's what it is. Wood, firewood is bois de feu. And so, you cook on an open fire with, we had, kerosene lamps, propane stoves, the idea of a warm water bath was a metal pan that you leave out in the sun to kind of heat up. And so
Yeah.
that was life. I mean, I didn't spend time inside. Like TV shows, a lot of them are still new to me. I would, as a 5, 6 year old, I could end up 20 miles from the village with a gang of ragtag kids. We'd all make it back home, but that was it. I mean, it was I didn't really, thinking about socioeconomics, I didn't understand how poor I was really until my freshman year at Samford.
Yeah, and this, as challenging as that sounds, you were happy.
Oh man, absolute blast growing up.
Yeah.
Absolute blast. I mean, I learned so much about life. I mean, my until I came to college, I smelled the ocean and saw the ocean every day. And so I think it gave me the benefit of perspective. Um, Living in the Virgin Islands was a melting pot in a lot of ways because you had different, every island has a different culture. All right.
Yeah.
And so you had this, I mean, I spoke English, I spoke Creole, I learned to speak Spanish, I spoke French. And so all of those things kind of allowed me to learn to assimilate in some ways, but then also I think something that was really important for me was in some ways I learned to isolate myself or separate myself from um, there was this facade to me, right? And really it was part of it was because my biological father wasn't around early on. And so there was Kendall or Kenny and that everybody saw. And then there was this, I've always really, really been like pensive. So there was always this almost thought process running in the background about letting people in and how I needed to show up. And that, I learned that really a lot in the Virgin Islands. St. Croix is only about 83 square miles. And
Yeah.
so I got to learn a lot of people. And
So
then,
you're 8 years old. Your mom moves you and your sister, you said, is that,
yeah.
to St. Croix. And how does she provide for you there? So tell us a little bit about your time at St. Croix.
Yeah, so my time in St. Croix, my mother started working at Merchants Market. I guess she just loves foodstuffs. So she was there, and that's kind of how she provided for us. After some time living with some different families that we had connections with. Yeah, lived with a pastor and his wife for a while. We moved into kind of our own place, and she kind of continued doing that. And then Hurricane Hugo happened in 1989, so we moved up to Boston for 13 months and lived with my grandmother and my aunt. And at that time, back in the 80s, the state of Massachusetts had one of the best economies in the U.S. And so you'd find, people from the Caribbean that would kind of immigrate, just seeking better opportunities. Went back to the Virgin Islands, like I said, 1990. And so she kept working that way, but then there's something that clicked, and I don't know what it was. Right. Um, Somewhere in 92, 93, maybe, she went back and got a GED. And I just, it's like, all right, well, I didn't know what it was about, and then when I started high school, she enrolled at the University of the Virgin Islands. And I had no idea how that was going to change my life.
Yeah.
I was 13, 14 years old, um, going into the ninth grade, and I was going to school and she was going to college. And she worked too, but it really didn't make sense. But at the same time, I also started, I didn't play school sports until I could pay my own fees associated with school sports. And so I had been hounding her about getting a job, like an official job. And so when I was about 14, going on 15, she allowed me to kind of start working. And that was a kind of another pivot for me. Start
Wow.
working in a pharmacy at that age, and she was going to college, and I was just going to high school and running track, and I'd given up playing. I had this in middle school. I had this gym teacher named Wanda Fuller, who taught me and a handful of other kids. She would take us up to the Buccaneer, and we learned to play tennis. And so I did that through middle, through junior high, and kind of around ninth grade or so, kind of migrated in a different path. Um, but that was kind of how my mom really knowingly, but unknowing to us, set the stage for us kind of having a desire or even thinking that college was possible.
Wow. So she was the motivation and the inspiration for you to go to college. So you apply to Samford University in the U.S. and the state
Mhm.
of Alabama, and you got in.
Yeah, yeah. And so Sanford probably one of the biggest value propositions I've ever given. Right. I remember, you know, the guy I started working for at this pharmacy kind of became an adopted dad, or adopted father to me. And I mean, really, from the love of a father, what that relationship, like the relationship you have with your kids. I mean, that's where I learned that piece of it. And when I was 16, after a few issues or episodes with some people. I mean, I was 16. I got jumped by like these 12 guys at school, and I just was like, at that point, man, for me, it was just I was on a path. I didn't know what that path was, but he asked me where I wanted to go to college, and I just kind of laughed and said, for me, I just wanted to be alive at 21. And so he kind of implored me to start looking at colleges, and Sanford was on a list of six schools that I applied to, and you know he had actually had to file for bankruptcy, close down the pharmacy my senior year, junior year of high school. He was bartending and waiting tables, and made it possible for me to actually do an interview and a visit at Sanford. And I looked at the director of admissions at the time, and he asked me about coming to school, especially in the South and whatnot. And I just told him, like, look, they're ignorant people everywhere, right? And I grew up in the majority. My great grandfather's a Frenchman. My great great grandmother was Portuguese, and um, if they accepted me and made it financially possible, I'd come to Sanford and they wouldn't regret it. And uh, November
Wow.
of that year, got my acceptance letter, and hadn't really looked back.
Was it, I'm trying to think this through as a child, as a kid, and now you're gonna, go to the U.S. and you're gonna be on your own and you're gonna go to this university. Was it super exciting, or were you scared to death, or what was going through your head at that time?
Man, a little bit of both. I've always been a risk taker, in a sense, but uh, I felt like my my village, in a lot of ways, had prepared me to be on my own. The culture shock was real though. That was different. And but I also think I needed it. I feel like had I stayed, my mother wanted me to stay and go to the University of the Virgin Islands for a couple of years, just to kind of get my feet under me. Pops was like, you need to go. And I think that it allowed me to really kind of take that next step in my growth as a person.
Yeah. So let's take this full circle. Didn't you recently give a graduation speech at Samford University?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
that
What a
that
story.
was man. That was it was real. It was surreal. I mean, and kind of anybody that spends any time around me knows. I mean, I love interacting with people, right? And um, but that moment was when I got asked. I was like, you guys sure about this? And he's like, yeah, you got to keep it. I had like 10 minutes. I was like, all right, cool. And so I started working on it. And my wife asked me, she said, so are you gonna write this down? What are you gonna do? I said, well, he's got to see a draft of this thing so that it makes sense. And so I texted the university president because we were gonna be in the same event. And I said, hey, when we see each other next time, I want some pointers. I need some pointers. You've done this before. And so he told me, he just reminded me, he said, it's not about you. He said, you're gonna be all these people there, but they're not there for you. Right. And he's like, you're just kind of you're the guy that gets in the way of dessert. So I was like, all right.
There you go.
And it was really good feedback. And so what I tried to do really was just create, we talk about moments. And so I just told a story about moments. I talked about being happy to be back at Samford. And my, not really about my time there and what I do and all that stuff. It was just really more about, I told a story about a patient in room 531 who keeps hitting the call light, not really because they needed the nurse, and it's the nurse's first week on the job, but it was really because they needed relationship. They needed comfort. They were scared. And how that nurse could create a moment by telling that patient, like, hey, listen, I know you're scared. I know this is a lot going on. Ask me give me some time to take care of these other 3 or 4 patients that I've got to kind of take care of. I'll be back and we'll walk through whatever it is you need to walk through to be comfortable being here. And whatever answers I don't have, I'll find them for you. And I just kind of told a few stories about that, but really ultimately it was just about creating moments, kind of leaning into hard to develop grit, and then just being radically committed to your why. And
Yeah.
that was it. And
What an
the
honor. What an
yeah.
amazing story. I mean, that's just that's crazy. So let's go back a little bit. Where's
Mhm.
your sister now? Is she still in St. Croix or is she in the US?
No, my sister actually lives in Des Moines. She finished so we my sister graduated from Syracuse in 2006.
Wow.
My mother graduated from the University of the Virgin Islands in June of 2007. I graduated from UAB, from PT school in December of 2007.
Yeah.
And then I've got a younger brother who, he became my brother. I basically adopted him when I was 19. He's got doctorate in pharmacy from Belmont. He graduated from Samford undergrad as well. So,
Yeah. I think it's a testament to your mom. I mean, she got all 3 kids up and going and gave them a life that she didn't have. So that's really impressive. So let's talk a little bit, although it may be tough, let's talk a little bit about your dad. So you said your dad wasn't around when you were a kid, and I know that you lost him recently, so you had some contact with him. Uh, tell us about that relationship and how that's hasn't been easy for you.
yeah, well, it my relationship with my father really was because of my relationship with Gary. Like Gary, he he kind of just showed up weird. And this is the guy that hired me as he owned that pharmacy in St. Croix, and he had sent me when I was getting ready to go to college. He's like, you need to go back to Dominica and you need to develop a relationship with your father. He said, he's like, I'm honored being your dad. But he's like, you've got this guy and you have to do your part to make it work. And so, I went. I was supposed to be there for 2 months. I spent 2 weeks because every time I tried to have a conversation, it never went anywhere. So I just left. I called. I said, "Hey, I'm coming back," and so I really didn't really have anything much to kind of do with him from that standpoint, and really just trying to figure things out. And through like going through college and kind of going through kind of my early professional career, I would always get a little ticked off when I would hear a story about him talking about me. And he had lost his wife, and I called. I was in New Orleans at the time, and I called him, and my aunt had told me he lost his wife. I called and I was like, "Hey, you need anything? Let me know. I'll come down, whatever it is." And I was getting off the phone and I almost told him I loved him. And I hung up the phone. I'm like, what the heck is wrong with you? you don't love this guy. Like, what are you doing? And then so I had this conversation with myself, and it was more like, look, you're a flawed individual, right? You're just a human being. You've got your own shortcomings. Why is this guy any different? And I didn't really have the emotional intelligence at that point to really talk to him about that. But I just reach out from time to time. Uh, and one year, actually, after losing my adopted dad, my cousin called and said, "Hey, listen, you need to make things right with your old man." And I told him I know how to do that, but because he asked, I would. And so I reached out to him. I said, we're talking. He gets ready to get off the phone. I was like, hey, listen. Let me just say this. Whatever has happened between us is water under the bridge, and how we move forward is up to you. And
Yeah.
he kind of was like, wait, you're clearing the air? I said, yeah, yeah. And I said, we can. This thing can be whatever you want it to be. And man, from that point, I had sent him a Christmas card, and so we're talking like in April. And I get a text message the next day, man, you have such a beautiful family. And I'm like, who the heck is this? This is a WhatsApp. I was like, oh, well, it's actually my father. And since that day, man, he called me, texted me. I mean, there wasn't a thing that happened in his life that he didn't call and talk to me about. And, you know, kind of gearing up for his funeral, because he was gonna have an 80th birthday party, and he's like, you have to be there. I was his only son. He's like, you got to be there. Are you gonna be there? I was like, yeah. And every time we talk, he's like, are you gonna be there? I'm like, yeah, I'll be there. You know, and we'd laugh and joke, and my he 2 month about a month or so after that initial kind of grace moment, he ended up in the hospital fighting for his life. And I was prepared to fly him to the U.S. or we end up making the decision for him to go to the UK. Just made more sense. But that was the first time in my life I told my father I loved him.
Mm. Wow.
So
So you had some time with him after you extended grace
yeah,
had a relationship. What, how long? 2 or 3 years?
about 3 years. Yeah,
3 years, and then he passed away.
yeah,
Incredible story, and thanks for sharing it. I know that's vulnerable. I know I asked you that on a vulnerable side, but I think it just kind of speaks to who you are and what you do, and you can live your life now knowing you did that, and that you were at peace and he was at peace with it. So
yeah.
yeah, that's awesome.
Thank
Okay, so let's talk about you now. You graduate from physical therapy school, and you decide to stay in the Birmingham area. And
you.
so tell us about what you did, right out of PT school, and how you got to what you're doing now.
Yeah. So right out of PT school, I mean, we had some pretty clear goals. I wanted to be, where I either owned a practice or was part of a practice within 5 years. And so I joined the practice, kind of became the top producer in that practice. And, as things happen, well, about at the end of the first year, I kind of started talking in earnest about kind of partnering. There was one location practice, and helped them grow to 5 locations, and that was fun. I mean, I learned a lot about myself. I mean, I think one of the biggest things I learned most what was important to me. And then great cook. We were at a conference in in New Orleans. A lot of things happened in New Orleans, and
Good
and he
city.
just said, yeah, it's a good city, right? And so he just said, look, kid, you and I speak the same language. You need to do more. I was like, all right, well, what does that mean? And so he introduced me to Tom House, and then this other guy named Tom Plummer. And so, just in talking to those guys, I realized that what I really wanted to do was just impact people. I didn't really care about corporate structure. I didn't care about who got credit. I just needed to be kind of in a place where the soil had the environment had the raw materials for me to grow. And so, I was in a partnership, and I had a 14-month-old at the time, and so after a meeting, I called my wife. I said, "Hey, everything we've been building the last decade or so no longer exists." She's like, "All right, cool. You know who you are. Go build your dream." Right? And
Yeah.
I called my mom, and my mom just said, "Amen." And so, for me, it was important that I had the support of those two.
Yeah.
My 14-year-old, she was gonna love me no matter what, right? And so, spoke to a handful of people and about, kind of what my next steps would kind of look like. And I had a performance company that I had founded while I was in with doing my PT thing with that initial venture. And made the decision that M3 was going to be everything that I had imagined it to be. Because I created M3, the concept of M3, when I was in PT schools, my first semester of PT school. And two of the people who now work within the company, my wife and one of my operators, um, I sat down with them, during that first semester. I was like, hey, I'm gonna start this company. You guys want to be a part of it? And they
In
both,
PT school. In
yeah,
PT school.
in PT school. And they were like, you're nuts. What are you talking about? He's like, we're not finished our first semester of school yet. I said, I know, but this is going to be awesome. This is what it's going to do. This is what it's going to be called. And he's like, well, why is it called that? And I explained it to him. M3 really was just making movement monumental, which has been my life, right? And so they were like, oh, all right, whatever, whatever. And so 2015, I formed it kind of in earnest after a bunch of patients kept asking me to work with their kids. And so, you know, it's I was at this point where either M3 had to grow or something drastic had to change in my life. I went out of state, talked to a couple of people who wanted me to move and help them run practices and kind of build kind of communities. And I was like, didn't sound appealing. So we just we went all in. All right. I took my proceeds from my first venture, dumped it into M3, and started building what I thought was going to be a single location, single practitioner kind of practice. And lo and behold, I go out to Denver to help somebody with a golf clinic, and that then leads into Pilates. And then so now I'm on this path to become a master instructor with Balance Body, which is a Pilates equipment and education company. I'm already doing the stuff with TP, what Title's Performance Institute. And so as I get back, man, within 6 months, um, I needed another therapist. And so I was like, all right, I'm not hiring another therapist, but a person who had worked with me before, really who I saw as my practice manager, brought her in. And then three or 4 months after she joined us, um, I've always worked on a Saturday. So there's a note on a box from this I think it was a Great Harvest, this bread company. And so there's some snacks in it and a note saying, this is your eighth straight Saturday working. Something needs to change. Right? And it was from her. And so we just kind of kept growing and kept growing. And during the pandemic, we actually kind of accelerated that growth. And now we're just so fortunate to we touch people across 4 different platforms in the Birmingham area. And really it's PT. We've really become the lifestyle brand that we talked about back in PT school. So it's PT, it's Pilates. We've got an NFL off-season program. We have an NFL draft prep program that we collaborate with some other guys on. We have a direct employer program. We do lifestyle consulting. It's kind of this blend of, I think, really, really awesome people um, within the company, but really, really awesome people that we get to serve. And so now that we are at 4, we had to really take a look at. I had to take a look at myself, man. I actually almost sold the company twice, and but just having conversations with people that I trusted, who'd been there before, I realized that we needed some structure. We needed a path, not just to continue to develop clinicians and people, but to develop leaders. And so we've taken a huge step in the last year, doing that as we continue to try to have fun in the clinic on a day-to-day basis.
That's awesome. And you know, obviously your story is of resilience and drive and never say die and all that kind of stuff. But you know, when if I were to ask your people that work with you now, what kind of leader is Kendall? What would they say?
Well, I lead by example. And I think in a project we were working on the other day, but it's the things that they talk about for me is just is the vision. It is tenacity and grit, but it's really just being committed. I have a real clarity on my why, and if you spend any time around me, I'm going to either motivate, support, or inspire you, and or I may just tick you off and you realize you don't want to be around me, which is okay. But that's really that's probably those things. They'll talk about my consistent use of just 30,000 foot view. Just getting things done.
Well, and you know, we've known each other for a while, and I can remember the very first time I met you, I believe, was at a conference. I think it was in Orlando.
Yeah.
And you were just standing there looking around, and I came up and introduced myself, and there was just something about it that you know, here's a young guy who had just, I think, started a practice, and you know, probably in all reality didn't have the resources to go to an expensive conference like that and be there, but there you were. And so my impression too is that you're willing to take, you know, as you say, risks or steps and look for opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, that conference, I mean, there's a laundry list of people I met at that first conference that man, I'm still in touch with today. Some
Mhm.
of them are much closer friends than I ever anticipated. Mentors in a lot of ways. But I do think that um, you know, when I talk to people nowadays, and you know, we talk. I tell you the story. I'm always looking for the right who's, right, and then just collecting people. And I was getting my oil changed, right, and I'm getting my oil change and listening to this audio book, but I hear this guy say, "Man, he did it again," and he's got all this angst and attitude. And so the guy who's helping me was like, "What? What happened?" He's like, "Oh, well, he's correcting me in front of people." And so the guy that's helping me goes, "Man, I told you, man, he used to do me the same thing." And so the other guy goes, "Well, I'm gonna say something. I'm not letting this go. I'm gonna say something." And so I'm just thinking, all right, what do I do here? Like, do I just kind of like hope that this works out for this guy? Because in my mind, it's not, right? And
Yeah.
so I pay, and I say, "Hey, let me talk to the two of you for a second." And they both come to the car door, and I'm like, "Look, I heard what you said to this guy, just a while ago, and I'm thinking about it." I said, I lead teams, and I promise you, you can say the same thing you just said with the same energy to that guy, and it's not going to go well. Like I said, egos are going to be involved. It's just not going to go well." I said, what you may not understand is that guy got promoted because he was productive. He didn't get promoted because he was a great leader. He got promoted because he was productive.
Yeah.
And so what he's doing now, he's managing people and managing outcomes. Those two things don't balance out. I said, so maybe you could try this. I was like, pull him to the side and say, "Hey, listen, I love being part of this team. And how we get measured is the number of satisfied customers going through this bay or these bays. And I want to be part of that process. I want to be a positive part of that process. And what would be helpful for me is if you pull me to the side, whether it's good or bad feedback. Yeah, just give me some feedback. Give me an opportunity to ask questions, make sure I understand, and I'll have a game plan of how to be the best teammate possible so that we can win. All right, we can win together." I said, that might go over a lot differently. And
Yeah.
he shook my hand. He's like, "Man, thank you, thank you." And so, my guy guides me out and goes, "Hey, I gotta ask you something." I was like, "What's up?" He said, "What company do you run, and do you have any entry level positions?" Like, what do you mean? Like you're here? He goes, "Well, I'm a pretty sharp guy. I don't really use my brain here." He said, "But what I just saw, you can lead me." And so we exchanged numbers, And I've spoken to him a few times since then, just trying to help him figure out the path, not to what he needs to do next, but why he needs to do something next, and then who the people are that he needs to surround himself with to go win.
Yeah.
And that's really what that conference and I think just I mean you coming up to me and having that conversation, I think that's what leaders do.
Yeah. Well, you tell a great story, and yeah, I mean, in my life too, like you're going through the line at Subway or something, and you see somebody doing their job really well and great customer service, and my first thought is always, I want to hire that guy. Because it's like, they've just got it, and so it's interesting how we as leaders see these things and hopefully have interactions with people as you did with your story, at the oil change place. That inspires people, and the guy wants to work for you. So it's a great story, and yeah, that's just what you do. So thanks for sharing that.
No worries.
Tell us a little too about you've got this other project. You have this kind of, if I'm saying it right, it's like a docu-series called the 20 Mile Project. So, what's the 20 Mile Project, and tell us what that is.
Yeah, so the 20 Mile Project is really it's a view of my life looking back, looking forward, and then also looking currently. And it really came from um just some experiences I've had, man. I speaking to a bunch of middle schoolers. So you got, 6, 7, 8 grade kids and just here in the inner city school in Birmingham. And one kid goes, "Hey, you talk about this and you talk about this, you talk about grit, but what if you lost everything tomorrow?" I was like, "Well, what do you mean? Everything?" He said, "Well, the job, car, house." I said, "Hmm." I said, "Well, so do I still have my family?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I said, "I still have my hands and feet. I can still think." He goes, "Yeah, absolutely. You just lose that stuff." I said, "Okay." I kind of did some quick math. I said, "It'll take me about a year and a half to get back to where I am right now." And you could see the seventh grader, like he wanted to call BS, right? He's like, "There's no way." And he's like, "Well, how? How?" I said, "Well, really, what you talk about in terms of losing everything," I said, that's just the outcome. It's not the thing to me. Like it's the outcome of the process I've been following. So if you're gonna give me another opportunity to do the same things, one, I've learned from my mistakes, I've learned from other people's mistakes, so I should be able to slingshot myself forward. And he was like, "Okay, okay, I mean, I guess, but we're gonna have to talk about this some more." All right, it's cool. 2 weeks later, what he talked about, happened. So I get to go back, so this happens on a Monday. That Wednesday, I'm back at the school. And I said, "Man," everybody sits down. I said, "Hey, man, hey, guess what? Guess what?" He's like, everybody's kind of like, "What's up?" I said, "The thing that my guy talked about a couple weeks ago, it happened." So what do you mean? I said, "I no longer own this company. I'm no longer a partner in this company. So I'm gonna start over from scratch." And kid was like, "So we get to see this?" Like, yeah, they asked me what happened and they're all a little bit ticked off. I was like, "Look, this is a perfect opportunity for me." And I said, "Everything that I told you guys would take, a year and a half, I said, try 2 weeks." And the same kid has the same kind of incredulous look on his face. And he's like, "There is no way." I said, "Listen, man, my contracts are rolling. I can build Blue Cross Blue Shield. The money may not be in the account yet, but all the things that I need in place for that to happen is in place." And he sat there and just like it was, just still in a state of disbelief. But we got to, I think, unpack something that really made sense for them looking back at it, which is, you know, how that you kind of talk about if you're a stoic, right? And the obstacle is the way. They got to see the value of having a process, having goals, and really having the right people around you where you're learning from the mistakes of others, you're learning from the experiences of others, and not really being so caught up with with the results of the process, but just following
Okay, now you glossed over it a little bit, but I got to know what the heck happened. I mean, what do you mean you lost everything?
it. I mean, I went from, your partner in a clinic, in a firm. You're running a really successful location. The winds are to your back, so to speak. Um, but leaving that company wasn't something I intended to do.
Yeah.
It wasn't the outcome I was looking for, but it was what had to happen for me to become this version of me.
So you were pushing the envelope of doing something new and different,
Yeah.
and that owner basically said, "You know what? I don't want to do that, and so maybe you better, leave and do it yourself." Is that kind of
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah, basically, I mean, and it was really more, I think, here's some of the things that are really, I think, really important when you think about your first job or any job. Like I started working when I was 10, so I could tell you about building a house, even though I haven't built one myself. It wasn't a solo venture of building a house. But what I learned was it doesn't matter how productive you are within an organization. Leadership really matters. Vision, honesty, integrity, like those things really, really matter. I mean, imagine sitting in a room, and there's one thing for me that really, really kind of hits home. There's a school here where the students don't pay to go to this high school, Holy Infant Cristo Rey. And I had a really, really dear friend who passed away a few years ago who was involved in it. And it was like we could support the school. It was like $21,000, right? And so everybody kind of can ante up what they want to from their respective locations. But we decided not to fund a scholarship at that school. I didn't vote. I didn't say, hey, this is my opinion. Just in the discussion, like I'm the only person that looks like me around this table. I'm the only person with my life experiences around this table. And I'm willing to bankroll the whole thing. And I'm willing to bankroll it because of what I said during that session, that meeting was I'm around this table because of programs like this.
Yeah.
Like when you see somebody do something, think about like
Yeah.
the when Roger Bannister broke the mile record.
Right.
What was that, like 13 people did it that same year? Because
Yeah.
like it's possible. And I don't care what you look like. I don't care where you come from. I don't care about any of that. I just feel like we have to show people what's possible. And then and I learned that just those values just didn't align.
Yeah.
And so, if you read Profit First or you read Conscious Capitalism, you read anything like any of those books, I mean, there's just something about a company and people who, when all else fails, put people first.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so now you didn't really answer my question, although that was a great story. So we're going back to the 20-mile project. So
Yeah.
what's
Oh yeah. So 20 Mile Project. So yeah, so it's a docu-series. Right now it's really just me telling stories about the journey. And the reason it's called 20 miles, the guy who's helping me on on the video side of this actually was with me when I cashed the check from my exit at my old company. This guy would ride with me 45, 50 minutes north to run up to out where I was running a Parkinson's class. And we were driving back one day and he was like, tell me how you do it. And I said, well, and I thought about this book on Good to Great, Jim Collins. And I said, well, there's this concept of 20 miles. And he said, what do you mean? I said, rain, sleet, hail, snow, I'm going 20 miles every day. That's my marathon. And he said, well, isn't a marathon 26.2? I said, no, it is for somebody else. But I want to live my life in such a way that people are able to set their watch by my actions. And so for me, whether the weather is good or bad, whether I feel like it or not, the goal is 20 miles. And it may not be 20 physical miles. It may be 20 intellectual miles. It may be 20 relationship miles. Those are all different ways that we could spend the capital that we have. But every single day, I want to make sure that I cover that distance because if I say I'm going to be at this place at this time, I'm not going to disappoint you. Right. And so for me, it goes back to, and also, I can go 20 miles from my village. in any direction, right? But I can make it back to my village. And so for me, it's the idea of grit, determination, leaning into, I mean, it's like I talked to my daughter, she's a Jno-Finn, and the 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 Jno-Finns have requirements, and that's we lean into hard. We do hard well, and we learn from it. And so I wanted a way to share my life lessons, just like I did with those kids at Wilkerson Middle School that probably would never make it to the clinic. Right? They probably, those people, most of the people who are going to end up watching this will never be actual clients of mine, but they get to understand that it's not how long you live, it's not where you're from, it's not all of that stuff. I mean, there are a bunch of people who endure hardship, but are there people who endure hardship and grow from it, grow through it? And when, Brene Brown talks about, strong back, soft front, they're able to take other people with them along the journey. And that's really what 20 miles is all about. It's imploring people to lead with heart, to love, to learn, to laugh, but most importantly, to take people with you, to impact others.
Well said. Well, for those listening, I would highly recommend you watch it because the videographer is very talented. He does a great job. As those listening to this know already, you're very charismatic, and so the the combination of the two and how it's filmed and the messages within it, it's impressive, Kendall. It's
Thank
impressive.
you.
I like it.
Thank
Yeah. So let's talk about hard things too, and you look at you look at our PT world.
you. Mhm.
Okay. And it's, let's be honest, it's not very diverse. It's pretty much a white Caucasian, mostly people in this profession are that. And like you said earlier, not everyone at the table looks like you. So has that been challenging working in this field from your perspective in that sense, or how do you deal with that, and how do you work through that?
Yeah, I think maybe the challenge has been, um, when you put a bunch of leaders in a room and a bunch of people who like getting things done, but also kind of have the ability to kind of ideate. Um, that it's difficult for people to see the value in not diversity for the sake of diversity, but to see the value in diversity of thought, of geography, of experience. That can be a little bit of a challenge because it can kind of lead to an echo chamber, right? Like, so if I'm a Midwest guy, I got Midwest problems. If I'm a South Florida guy, I got Florida problems. They're different problems, right? Or different opportunities, right? And so, um, I think, Samford, I mean, I got comfortable being one of 100, one of 50. So I don't think it's been as much. I mean, I was the only black male in my PT class. There are only four minority students in my class, in PT school. I mean, I kind of think about my practice. 98%, 97% of our clients don't look anything like me. And I think that's a blessing in disguise. Um, and you talk about hard things, life just kind of prepares me. I mean, I got to experience it in undergrad. I got to experience it in PT school. And I got to experience it as a provider. From an NP asking me to clean up a patient's urine off the floor. And I'm walking by with a rollator, and I'm like, well, are you asking that you and I do it, or are you asking me to do it? And she's like, well, I mean, I was asking you to do it. And it was really this before they color coordinated the scrubs. And I usually only used to work on orthopedics. So I showed her my name tag. I was like, this institution hired me to do this job. But we also have, um, a principle called own it. So if you're asking that we do this together, cool. If you're asking me to just do it, I'm sorry, but that's not what the hospital system is paying me to do. And the people around the the nurses station. I'm like, ooh, ooh, you know, and there's a guy that was he's a patient transport. He went down to another floor and was telling them at the nurses station what happened. And I get a page, and it was from a student that I went to Samford with. And so I called, and the student was like, "Hey, are you up on this floor?" I was like, "Yeah." "Did you just talk to?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that you would do that. But I think, it's kind of one of those things. I've had patients that didn't want to come to, they've been to my practice, but didn't want to come to a practice and be treated by a black therapist. And I just told the guy, like, that's cool. But these people can't see you the first time legally. This person is going out on maternity leave, and that just leaves me. And unfortunately for you, I can't do a thing about being black. All right. So, like, that's your choice. I'll call your physician and let them know that you've got some particular needs and you can go wherever. But I think the more I lean into the opportunities to engage people, I used to think about it from a lens of I'm going to go in here and I'm going to represent all these people. But I'm like, who are these people? I'm going to go in here and I'm going to represent a voice or perspective that needs to be represented in this room. And so if there's no room for me at this table, hell, I'm going to go build my own table, right? And I'm going to get the people that I feel that need to be around the table. Because I don't think, I see the lack of diversity really as an opportunity to impact people's perspective. Because if I walk in that room and I'm just all about diversity, and man, you don't really, that's not what's moving the needle. Access to healthcare moves the needle. And if I can share with you how, somebody who lives 2 miles right of I-65 has a life expectancy of 60, and somebody who lives 5 miles east of 65, all right, has a life expectancy of 90, and I have a path and a plan to change that, and you're willing to follow me, or we're willing to work together to make it happen, that's the opportunity that we have when we, I don't know, when we just are okay with being one.
Yeah. What a great mindset. What a great mindset. I wish everybody had that mindset. So that's awesome. Well, Kendall, in anticipation of our discussion today, what haven't we talked about or what haven't I asked you that you want to be sure and get in the program?
Um, well, there's one thing. So
Yeah.
you're a pizza guy, all right?
Yeah.
And so um, my favorite pizza probably would be um, something that you never could, like, you're gonna say, hey, if I came to your house and you'd be like, what kind of pizza you want? Make me something you've never made before. Like that
Yeah.
probably would be my favorite because it
Yeah.
would be it would be it would be an experiment,
Sure.
all right? And it'd be one of one. So man, that other than that, I mean, I think you've covered it. You know, I think what I probably would say though is my why. When people ask me like, well, why do I do what I do? I think I was created to motivate, support, and inspire.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you certainly do that, and as you mentioned on the pizza, you're just a lifelong learner. So why not try something new and different? Because you don't know what you don't know, and so maybe we both discover something like, oh, what I've never tried before might be my go-to in a couple months if it turns
Yeah.
out right. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, Kendall, at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is in relation to leadership. What is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Yeah, I think with relation to leadership, I think it's understanding that it is a journey, and you're not born with it. But there's something that happens in life that kind of stokes that fire, where you realize that the opportunity to impact people really starts and ends with leadership. It's this blend of what you do, what you say, how you do it, how you say it, and I think if we can all strive to kind of become level 5 leaders, I think this world could be a much better place. It'll
Yeah.
never be perfect, but I think if we could learn um, the soft side of leadership, the nurturing side of leadership, if we can learn to be strong where we need to be strong and nurturing and warm and vulnerable where we need to be. I think that I mean there's nothing that's impossible if we really understand that like every day we if we identify the capacity we have to lead ourselves and we continue to work on improving that, growing that capacity, we could truly change the world.
Well said. It sounds like you just described your mother.
Yeah.
How's your mother
In a lot
doing?
of ways.
How's your mother doing?
She is awesome. My mother turned 86 yesterday. No, no,
Whoa.
76 yesterday. My mother turned
Oh,
76
she's
yesterday.
going to be mad at that.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
76.
36. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
But she's great. I mean, I actually talked to her on my way to the office today. And I mean, she sounds as spunky as ever.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, Kendall, this has been a real pleasure. Your story is fascinating. It's just such a inspiration to see the resilience and the way you look at the world and the way you just keep going forward and bringing people along with you, like you said, is makes it all worth it. So appreciate your time today. Wish you the best of luck, and I know we're going to see each other down the road because we see each other on a regular basis. So. Congratulations on doing what you're doing, and wish you all the best going forward.
All right. Thank you very much for having me, Steve. This is a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
All right. You too.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.